Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Hormone Helper podcast. I'm Coach Andrew, your hormone helper from Fit for All Fitness. I personally coach over 1,600 men and women to help better understand their hormones so they can lose weight and get their metabolism back on track. With this podcast, you're going to hear from me and my special guests about everything from metabolism to thyroid to weight loss. And we even talk a little bit of sexy time as we chat to spread more knowledge thick like butter on your hormones. If you're ready to learn, I'm ready to share, so let's do this. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast where today we will be talking about cravings, and that is cravings for carbs, for salty foods, and for sugary foods, because cravings do mean something, and it is important for us to understand what. Now, I bring up cravings in this episode because I had a great conversation with my brother when we were doing a workout together. We were talking back and forth about the changes that we've made to nutrition in the past and the ridiculous diets that we've tried. And with those diets, the inevitable cravings that kind of come up for the process. I bring this up because, like, for me in my life, I started strength training really early, around grade 11. And I got pretty serious into it about halfway through my college year. And during that time, I had an absolute obsession with training. Like, there were days where I was training at least 3 hours a day. I'd start by doing a 10K treadmill run. I did then an hour workout. I'd follow that with like a rock climbing session or a jujitsu session. And although when I look at it now, like, I knew I was definitely in that overtraining area, I was doing all of these really extreme diets to kind of further along my results, just so that way I could see like an inch more in progress. And this is where I was doing things like tracking macros. I was attempting to intermittent fast because I thought that was kind of like the thing to do. And I was doing some really extreme things like keto. And I feel like most people have this period when they're younger, when they kind of start to overdo a thing that they like in hopes that they're going to start to get better results for it. And the unfortunate thing, which I didn't recognize at the time, was that it came with a lot of different cravings that I had never experienced before because of things like my lack of energy. My carb intake had to be through the roof. And I don't exactly remember the numbers, but I know that me and my brother at one point were eating about 10,000 calories a day, which I know sounds like nonsense, but we were all in on it because that's what we thought that we could basically use to be able to gain weight. Now, in doing that, I found myself almost drawn to carbs on a daily basis. Like, I was compelled to eat them. Even if I wasn't hungry, I craved carbs, and it became my little addiction. But I thought that, in the moment, it's not going to hurt me because I was burning so many calories each and every single day. Now, on top of the carbs, I always had to have my sweets. Now, while I don't eat a lot of sweet stuff now, and even in the past, it was kind of like a donut with coffee or a chocolate bar. Like, after a hard training session or anytime I pushed my body, I started to crave that sugar. I started to ask for it. And when I didn't have that sugary thing, I remember my body asking for it, almost like it would feel physical disappointment if I didn't get the reward or that sugar hit that I had set up for myself every single day. Now, it took me forever to realize that this type of feeling wasn't good. And before you know it, I was running our studio location in Oakville, wondering why I was having cravings for donuts, and I would always seek out carbs randomly throughout the day. Because when I was running the studio, my activity changed. I was only able to work out an hour a day, but I still had those habitual cravings of that 10,000 calorie eating that I was so accustomed to. And I share this because I know that I'm not the only one. Like, most of the clients that we work with in our Vantage program experience one of these three cravings. So they either crave carbs, they crave salt, they crave sugar, or they have a combination of some of these. Now, here's the thing with cravings, though. If you aren't really aware of when they're happening, then it can be something really easy to overlook or something that you miss altogether because maybe you're just chalking it up to having some bad eating habits. So I want you to know this: your cravings can be completely taken care of, but you just have to know what each one of them means so that way you can make the changes needed with either lifestyle or with food. Now, speaking of the lifestyle bit, there is kind of a second piece to cravings. And the second part of my convo that I had with my brother, and when we talked about this, I was like, I know I have to share this. And that's the difference between a craving and an addiction. Because there are tons of people who are, in fact, addicted to food. These are the type of people who use food to cope with stress. They use food to deal with anger and maybe loneliness, and they kind of quote unquote eat their feelings away, literally. Food, it's actually become the most absolute go-to for most people, and that's because we've spent a lot of time as a society conditioning people that food should be used for everything. We're told we should eat to celebrate our birthdays. We should eat at funerals. We should eat at gatherings with family. We pretty much just use any excuse for food to be a part of the picture. And even things like movie snacks. The compulsion for eating while watching Netflix has become this really huge deal. And why is that? Because food itself can be really addictive. Eating food can actually release the same feel-good hormones as having sex or having worked out. So those endorphins, and the main one called dopamine, it actually reinforces your body's signal for food by making the food feel good. And of course, we want to do things that make us feel good more often, right? So here's the difference kind of between an addiction and a craving, because it's important for you to understand before I start taking all this time going into cravings, okay? A craving is something that your body feels that it lacks, while an addiction is a neurotransmitter response because your body's become accustomed to having that provided to it. So when we have an addiction, we are short a specific nutrient thing. Our body is reacting in a specific way that's indicating to itself, I need to have either sugar, carbs, or salt in order for me to get over whatever this obstacle is. The obstacle could be lack of energy, could be excessive hunger, could be dealing with stress. Whatever it is, we need to then ask for it, and your body asks for it in the form of a craving. It gives you a signal from your gut, and that gut says, hey, I want you to give me this. And that's why a craving sometimes can be so random, because it's whatever your body needs in the moment. Now, unlike that, a complete opposite is an addiction. So it being a neurotransmitter response, an addiction is because your body has become accustomed to having it provided. So what I mean by that is something like smoking. Nicotine. Nicotine makes you feel good. And so often we're not craving the cigarette if someone is smoking. They're craving the nicotine because the nicotine makes them feel good, and you want to do things that make you feel good. And your body says, the way that I get dopamine is to have multiple cigarettes. I have more cigarettes, I get more dopamine. It's the same thing with food. When we eat to cope with stress, when we eat because we feel overwhelmed, when we eat because we're just super frustrated or maybe we're bored, what happens is we alleviate that frustration, that anger, that boredom, and so our body feels good. Now, naturally, your brain hardwires a signal that says, eating food made you correct this issue, and that made you feel good. So that's going to be one of my go-to neural pathways for you to deal with whatever this is. So every time you have stress and you eat to cope with stress, you reinforce that neural pathway. Every time you eat to cope with frustration, or you eat because you're bored, or you eat because you're watching a movie, you reinforce that neural pathway. So the next time that thing happens again, you are significantly more likely to repeat that pattern because your brain knows, if I do this, I'm going to feel good at the end. And that's why food is so dangerous, because food is one of those things that actually releases dopamine. Like, we don't get dopamine from drinking water. We're not like, oh, wow, drinking water made me feel good, let me do it 5 times a day. But food is one of those things that happens. So I bring this up because a lot of the times when we're working with clients, it's a matter of seeing, okay, is this in fact a craving or is this an addiction? Have you been restricting your food for too long? Have you been on a chronic amount of diets? What does your level of stress look like? That's the first thing to use to determine, like, okay, is it in fact an addiction or is it a craving? So step one is understanding if you just have a regular craving or if it's that chemical addiction. Now that we know the difference between both, this is where step two comes into play, and that's to understand what your cravings mean to the body. So we've got basically our 3 level of cravings, okay? We have our cravings for carbs, our cravings for sugar, and our cravings for salt, okay? So when we're looking at the way that the body asks for nutrients, it's important for you to understand how the body is actually using nutrients every day. Like our body uses carbs differently, then it uses raw sugar differently, then it uses salt differently. And so that's why the body's asking for the 3. So, in order for you to get a really good understanding of what craving you have, you got to know how your gut works. Okay. Our main fuel source is carbs. Carbs, when we digest carbs, it creates something that's called glycogen. And glycogen then converts into glucose, which is basically blood sugar and raw sugar to be used to fuel your metabolism with whatever you need to do. So, the whole purpose of digesting food regularly or having carbs regularly in your diet is to regularly fill up your gas tank so your body can process sugar or create glucose along the way so you have a steady stream of energy to pull from. Now, alongside that, your body also has a hormonal system that it's running. It needs your thyroid to maintain the same speed of your metabolism. It needs all of your hormones to be created regularly. And that's where things like sugar might come into play or salt might come into play. So we have basically the 3 that I see all the time when coaching: the carbs, the sugar, and the cravings for salt. Okay. Now, I want to start with the carb one because the carb one can be like a really, really difficult cycle to break out. Okay. When people have cravings for carbs, it's normally because they're very, very low in blood sugar. So when we eat carbs, because we're creating glycogen, we are spiking our blood sugar. Our blood sugar goes from stable to high. Whenever we release blood sugar, we get a hormone that's called insulin, and insulin releases body fat production. Now, when we do body fat production, when we're creating or using body fat, it starts to pull our blood sugar low, and then we get low blood sugar. And if our blood sugar becomes too low, then we have cravings to eat carbs again. So all a craving for carb is, it means that you're not fueling your body properly. Either you're missing your meals, either you're not intaking enough carbs in your routine, or maybe you're waiting too long between meals. And so your body is starting to pull back on that sugar. It's starting to use all the blood sugar in your body. And then it says, okay, you know what? I'm run down. I need to start making new productions of sugar. And this is where now you start to intake more carbs. The cycle typically happens as you start getting later in the day, because typically when you wake up, you should have a high amount of energy naturally. So as we start getting past the 2 to 3 p.m. mark, this is where you're going to start to get hungrier, where you're going to start to get more irritable, where you're going to start to feel more lower of energy, because it's the indicator that your body is using everything that's in the gas tank. And this is why, especially when I'm building out plans for clients, I'm looking at, hey, what are your meal times regularly? And how can we space your meals or add snacks in between to be able to prevent your blood sugar from dropping? The goal to not get a carb craving is to have a steady level of insulin and have a steady level of blood sugar. This is why we don't just have one big meal. This is why I often don't tell people to intermittent fast. This is why I don't tell people to go on keto. It's not that those things are bad. It's that they have a very limited time before insulin starts to change, and then someone starts to develop a craving again, which is a big thing. Okay. Now, the next one is sugar. So, wanting sugar says this about your body: it's a very heavy imbalance of blood sugar levels. So, unlike carbs, which makes glycogen, where you're getting a steady level of release, there are times when we are putting in a large amount of effort. Maybe it's we're exercising a lot. Maybe we're under eating very heavily. Maybe we're not eating the right types of foods. Even if we're fueling our body, our blood sugar level still stays really low. Okay. And we don't want high blood sugar, but we also don't want really low blood sugar. So if your body has asked for carbs and you have fed it the carbs that it needs for the day, but maybe you're not in the right macros, you don't have the right nutrients in your diet, maybe your spacing is wrong, maybe it's not the right types of foods, then there might be a chance that your blood sugar is going to drop. Typically, you'll see a craving for sugar around like a 1 to 3 p.m., which is basically like the midday slump, or like an 8:30 to 9:30 p.m. just before going to bed. Because not only are your carbs low at those times, your hormone cortisol is going to be very, very drained, which means you're not going to be able to produce energy regularly. And that means that you're going to need a quick shot of liquid energy. And the reason why the body asks for sugar in this moment is because direct sugar, like raw sugar, is something your body does not have to work to break down. It just happens. Your body can just intake sugar, spike in glucose, spike in that blood sugar, and then your body makes it through. Now, the hard part about a craving for blood sugar or for sugar is if we intake the raw sugar and we get the huge spike, we encourage the body to ask for sugar more frequently. So typically, people will experience cravings for carbs first, and then if they don't solve their nutrition patterns, their body starts asking for sugar more frequently because sugar is the dirtier and quicker way to get raw energy in a super, super quick and potent state. So from a sugar perspective, we want to keep our blood sugar stable and we don't want it to pass a certain point. Now, the way that we can do this is we can put in complex carbs, which take longer to break down in the food, or we can focus on having a higher amount of fats in our diet because fats help us feel fuller for longer. It takes us longer to process fats. And so we can actually get a little bit of we can keep our blood sugar levels higher, is what I'm trying to say. Now, the salt piece, okay? Salt is a completely different one. And it's important you understand how the thyroid works. If you are craving salt, it means that your thyroid is struggling or that your body is dehydrated. Okay? Because your thyroid needs salt as one of the primary building blocks to create all of your hormones, your TSH, your LH, your FSH, anything that your thyroid needs to run, salt is a very big part of that. Consider it like a primary building block. So if we're always feeling really run down, if we're always having a high amount of stress, and for some reason we can't cope with our daily needs, well, your thyroid's going to try to kick in and help, but it can only help with how many hormones it has stored. After it's used the storage, it's going to say to your gut, hey, I need more raw building blocks. I need you to ask for saltier foods. Because when you intake salt, then the body can use that to break down and help the thyroid. It's the same thing if your body's dehydrated. So if we do not drink water, then the body uses salt or the building blocks of salt to pull hydration into the muscle. And when you urinate, you also lose salt as well too. So the combination from being dehydrated and pulling salt away from the thyroid to the muscles, combined with, okay, you're not intaking the water and you're urinating your extra salt away, of course your body's going to ask for salt. Now, cravings for salt, they manifest pretty much whenever you are in a high amount of stress or you're super dehydrated. So if you're going through a really stressful day, boom, the craving will appear. Or if you're incredibly dehydrated through the day, boom, a craving will appear. So we have all three of these. They have different triggers, but they all say different things about the body. Now, all of these cravings that I just talked about, typically they're partnered with something that's called adrenal tiredness. So, what adrenal tiredness is, or adrenal fatigue, is like your body's coping mechanism for managing stress or managing energy is just starting to get really run down. You've got these little glands on your kidneys that are called adrenal glands, and they help you produce energy, create cortisol so you can have energy through the day. If we're always shorting ourselves of nutrients, we're under eating, we're missing meals, our blood sugar's all over the place, our thyroid is really messed up and it can't keep up with the amount of stress, then guess what? Your adrenals are going to start to shut down and you're going to start to experience adrenal tiredness. This is where, when a lot of clients come to me, they're like, Andrew, I don't know what happened. I'm like 15 to 20 pounds overweight. I've never been this heavy before. I never feel hungry. I always feel super sluggish and slow. My hair's really thin. I feel like I'm wasting away. My muscles, they feel sore all the time. That's because your adrenals are at this point where they can't help you output energy. And so you start to feel fatigued all the time. So those are the three cravings: the carbs, the sugar, and the salt. Now, in knowing this now, I'm pretty sure that it's easy to see that cravings can sabotage a lot of goals. Goals like weight loss, they can throw off someone's digestion if they're working on getting rid of issues like bloating or IBS. They can slow down your metabolism. And that's why one of the first steps in our program, our Vantage program, is to get rid of the cravings. Because if you're trying to change your nutrition, but you have cravings, it means that your body's not absorbing the right nutrients, or you're not getting enough food. And so you're not going to see a result. If you try to change your training, but you have cravings, it might result in you overeating when you start exerting yourself more, in which case it's going to sabotage your goal. Or if you're trying to work on your routine and you're trying to change your systems because you feel really tired through the day, having cravings changes the way your body uses energy because it's affecting your thyroid. It could be affecting your adrenals. And so that has to be repaired first, so that way you can get into a routine where you have a steady amount of energy. Steady energy is a stable metabolism. A stable metabolism digests food on a regular basis, and regular digestion of food with split averaged meals that go throughout the day give you a steady level of insulin, a steady level of blood sugar, which means that you don't crave sugar, which means that your metabolism can run at a good operating speed. It's like an endless cycle. And it seems super complicated, but it's not. It's just a matter of we target whatever the specific craving is. So in the Vantage program, we're working on, okay, if you struggle with carbs, let's look at your meal spacing. If you struggle with sugar, let's look at maybe the food types that you're eating or your hormones. And then the thyroid, it's all hormonal. But through the process, our 12 to 16 week program navigates making sure that you're tackling the digestion first, or the cravings first. Then it goes into digestion to make sure that cravings don't come back, because digestion plays a large part in why the cravings came up in the first place. Like maybe you're not digesting food well, or maybe you're not getting enough nutrients from the stuff because your gut bacteria is very weak. We tackle that, and then we start to look at things like weight loss, things like IBS, and then start to implement the activity. Like, notice how the activity, doing the recovery piece, it's almost like further along in the process, because we need to address the cravings and we need to address the gut first. And that's one of the biggest things that we work on in the Vantage program. And it's because when I see people who have cravings and they've struggled for longer than 4 months with cravings, I know for a fact they're at a plateau. I know for a fact their goal is sabotaged. And how could it not be if your body's asking for energy at different times? Your body is looking for you to create a level of stability. It wants to feel safe. It wants to feel stable. It wants to know when and where you're going to be getting nutrition from, so that way it can adapt and focus on keeping your metabolism the same. Your body just wants to keep the metabolism the same. And if it's not, that's when it's going to grind your progress. It's going to stop your weight loss. It's going to come up with a lot of inflammation in the gut and give you digestive issues, because it's going to say, well, hold on, I don't want to be eating these things or losing this weight if it's affecting my current energy level. And that's why in the Vantage program, we pass the 3 checks. 1, are your hormones stable? 2, is your energy level through the day consistent? And then 3, do you have the right macro and micronutrients to be able to have that level of stability for food? That's your main energy and your main source. But step number 1 is for you to recognize whether or not you have cravings. So, like I said at the very beginning of the podcast, step 1, do I have cravings or do I have an addiction? Am I addicted to food? Because we also work with people who have food addiction as well, and that's a totally different process. But if you have that, reach out to me. We'll hop on a discovery call and we can see how we can help. Okay. But if you don't have the addiction piece and you know it's a cravings, track down and write down, when am I having the craving? What did I eat? And how did I feel after the craving? And then you'll be able to know with this episode, is it carbs? Is it sugar? Is it salt? From there, we work on implementing those things. If you need more carbs into your routine, if you're under eating, start eating like a regular human. If your blood sugar's all over the place, start changing up different food types. Remove refined foods, remove the boxed items, remove a lot of refined sugars to steady your blood sugar level. And if it's salt, well, we need to look at, 1, what are the stressors that we're coming up with every single day? Are the stressors really high? And then the second thing is, if my stress is managed, how can I increase my hydration and up my salt intake? Because salt is not bad if you're cooking with it and if you're using like a Himalayan sea salt or a Celtic salt. That's what I wanted to share with you guys with the episode. So hopefully you understand on cravings and basically what's involved from a craving perspective. Remember as well too, one of the biggest things is like getting support with this if you're having a hard time. The Vantage program was created because a lot of people kept reaching out to us as a coach, and they were saying to me and Lorna, like, I'm struggling a lot with these things. Is there any way that we can tackle digestion? Is there any way that we can tackle bloating, IBS, cravings? Because I don't want to deal with it anymore. It's been like this for 2 years or 3 years. So you know if this is something that's been on your radar for a long time, and the best thing that you can do is to reach out and see what support looks like for you. And to do that, all you have to do is go into the show notes. There's a link to book what's called a discovery call. This is where you and I hop on a call and we go through what's been going on. We go through your goals, and then we walk you through what the support options could look like. And if the Vantage program is a good fit for you, boom, we can get you started and get you rolling. Okay. Thanks for listening to this episode. And hopefully you guys tune into the next one. Coach Andrew out. We will catch you later. Bye. Well, it seems I'm all out of info juice for today. That's all for this episode, and thank you so much for listening. Please leave a raving review for me if you've learned something good, and make sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode. Now, if you're in the mood for some more great content and tools to get your hormones on track, why not check out our free Facebook group and the blog on our site? We do amazing weekly trainings in our group that me and my wife call Tea and Teachings that give good tips for anything hormones and metabolism related. It's also a great community where you get to share your goals and success with like-minded people just like you. I'll make sure to drop both the Facebook group link and the blog link in the show notes for you. Or if you're ambitious like me, the name of the group is Weight Loss and Balanced Hormones. It'll say Fit for All beside it with a picture of me. So come and join us and have more fun.